action plan for synergies, space synergies between civilian and military users and defense users. Right? So you start seeing this change. And part of this also links to another strategy that we published and also links to this document. And just to a very important thing on this strategy document, every year, the High Representative of the EU, so the External Action Service, prepares a classified annual space threat and landscape analysis at EU level, and this builds on EU member states' intelligence also. And this is a classified, and just for the record, if it is classified information, we cannot speak about it, otherwise we go arrested, actually. That's the penalty if you speak about classified information in settings that you're not allowed to. So when we talk about this situational awareness, and this is one of our major projects also at the European level, and this also builds on national capabilities that they all come together, pull and share, and then EU tops it up with more infrastructure and more know-how and builds from there. Also developing the commercial aspects of it, like commercialization wave that Bruno was talking a bit earlier too. And then you have the space surveillance and tracking, where you monitor satellites, you give collision warnings, say you have to move your satellite, otherwise it will clash. So we have the EU SST consortia. We monitor things like space weather, and space weather, speaking about commercialization, is not just about the radiations of the sun that can kill every electronic piece of equipment on Earth, and this including, for example, airplanes. 2 minutes. Okay. But it's also about space tourism. Nordic countries in Europe, for example, depend a lot on this. There's, of course, the data sharing, collaboration, etc. So when we speak about space and the Europeans' role on it, Europe's role on it, we are talking about strategic autonomy, so avoid the dependence of foreign space systems, because this is considered vulnerability. And, of course, the EU wants to avoid the supply chain issues that we had during COVID. There's, of course, the space diplomacy. So both ESA and EU, although autonomous, they still engage in dialogues with other counterparts, being agencies or private companies, etc. And the Russia one is a good example, because for many years we were, until the aggression of Russia to Ukraine, we were using Soyuz launchers also. But then there's this military dimension. So satellites are essential for intelligence, communication, navigation, etc. You have the anti-sat satellites. This, of course, is an issue and is a message of power. And now Europe's challenge is how to balance the civil and military uses without escalating more tensions, considering the global landscape. And then a very important aspect, and this is just to illustrate why I disagree with Bruno saying that today is just about prestige, is that the space economy is projected to grow from $500 billion in 2024 to more than $940 billion by 2023. So this is a huge business that we are talking about. This is a huge economic revenue, and a lot that is here. Of course, in Europe, we are a bit slower compared to the agile systems that you have in the US, for example, with private companies like SpaceX. But we are doing our best to foster also the Europe unicorns in space and the startups and new business, etc. Also a very interesting thing that was already mentioned by Dimitrios and Bruno was the budget and the money allocated to the space activities. And indeed, Europe's budget is not big when you compare with NASA, China, Russia, etc. But we have something that they don't have, is that we have 7-year stability in the budgets. It means that as EU works with 7 years, with budget cycles, we don't need to go every year, like the US and NASA has to go to the Congress to ask for money. We know that for 7 years we have that money, and we know what we have to do, and we work with that. We are missing a European SpaceX equivalent. It's undeniable that, but okay, we are trying. We are trying to be independent. And for you guys that are international relations, and everyone that is international relations and geopolitics, you need to keep in mind that space is no longer a distant frontier. Like I mentioned, it's shaping the security, economy, diplomacy in the world. Not only in Europe, China, Russia, but absolutely everywhere. Remember the Bangladesh example? It's not naively. Or Nigeria, why China was launching satellites for Nigeria. It's not naively. It's also part of the soft power and have access to resources, etc. And you must think of space not as a separate domain, but actually as an extension of the political struggles that you and all the opportunities that you study that happen on Earth is an extension of what happens on Earth. So the future of global power will be decided not on the land, not on the sea, not on the air, but up there in orbit. And that's why it's becoming more and more important.
Well done, very was outstanding as well. So I prefer, because we just have 10 minutes, to hear if students attending this colloquium have questions in the room. Do you have any questions for the panelists? No?
No.
Okay, if you don't have, or if you're shy to ask, I have one question. We now seeing decentralization of space. Is it a good word? Can we say that conventions, treaties that used to forbid exploration in the moon or even in the Arctic and Antarctica are bound to have an end in the next decades or years due to this realistic view of, or revisionist view of space. What do you think? This is one question. So, and I would also like to ask you, despite that China is a latecomer in space achievements, could we say that China's, let's see here if I'm not wrong with the words, China, because I'm not an expert on space, China is building what we call buffer satellites to prevent the US or other rivals from having access to data. Is this serious? Can this actually be a new trend that puts a latecomer into the forefront of space race? So I will leave you with these two questions for now, okay? Because we don't have actually the time. So who would like to be the first one commenting?
Can I take the first one, Dimitrios, and you take the one on China? Because this is actually a very interesting question and one of the topics that I'm fascinated about. And actually, on the treaties, what the treaty says is that they don't forbid space exploration. It says that it needs to be on the benefit of humankind. That's the difference. But also says that it's up to the countries, because only countries can sign international treaties, not private companies. It says that the countries are the ones responsible for regulating the national space activities. So you start seeing, and for those who follow space policy in Europe, you know that the European Commission is working on an initiative proposal for a EU Space Act, and one of the reasons is precisely because you start seeing a growing number of countries setting forward their national legislations on what regulates space activities. Portugal just did it actually quite recently, very inspired in the French space law, but you see that. So in EU, in particular, you have around 11 to 17 countries currently with existing national laws or proposing to do that. And so it means that it's the countries that have to. Where would be the problem? Imagine that you gave the Helium-3 example. The problem with laydown, if a country goes there, it can be a private company, because you do have private companies now operating on behalf of countries, picks up the helium, comes back to Earth and tries to make a business out of it.
Yeah.
And there remains the question, how do you handle that? Because then that is for commercial purposes. It's not on the benefit of mankind. And this will be up to the countries to decide how that goes. The Artemis Accords, for example, it's not just about putting humans on the moon. It's a strategic way, because you need to be in the moon also because of gravity and physics to have the necessary propulsion and speed, etc., to reach Mars. So you just don't leave Earth directly to Mars. You need to make a pit stop on Earth to leave Earth orbit, and then the moon orbit is not as intense, the gravity there, so it's easier then to go to Mars. So the idea is actually to build something in the moon. But then you have other questions. It's like, imagine there is a crime in the moon. How does it work? Because, for example, International Space Station, depending on the module that you are, it will apply the national law of the module that you are. So you have all these type of questions and debates. And even in the frame of the UN, you don't have exactly a lot of replies to some of these questions, but it's of course something that is ongoing. The discussions on these limitations of the treaties, you have two currents. One that says you have to revise the treaties, others that say that you don't have to revise the treaties. But there's a lot of questions without answers, and these discussions go in the UN framework for more than 15 years. Okay. The issue is also that what led you to have the Outer Space Treaty that is from 1967 are not the same geopolitical conditions that you have today that will make everyone sit around the table and reach an agreement. And for example, one of the criticisms to Artemis Accords is that it's very US vision oriented. It's bilateral agreements. It's not the same thing as in UN framework. It's a bilateral agreement that is signed between the US and another country where they agree in a number of things. So, for example, smaller players, they complain that we are not being heard and we want to be heard on this. And the same thing happened with the Outer Space Treaty. So before it was two countries, in 1967 it was about US and Soviet Union. Today it's much more players, so it will be much difficult to reach an agreement on how to tackle these issues. So I think at this moment, is as long as nobody reaches the moon and actually starts trying to sell something, it's okay. But and technologically we are not there yet to start extracting resources and commercializing it. But it's a concern, existing concern at international level on how we are going to handle that.
Yeah. So
where is the border for in the benefit of humankind and not self-profit?
So that's very interesting, your view on it. Finally, Dimitrios, 3 minutes to end this.
Yeah, great. So just to build briefly on Vera, I totally agree. I'm very much concerned about this idea of cislunar space, which is exploiting now the region between Earth and Moon, with all that implies. I also agree with Vera that it makes sense to treat space as a projection of global politics, but also see that as a sort of a closure of the global system that stopped somewhere in the orbital space. And why I talk about closure, because by the 1960s you already had the Outer Space Treaty, and you had all the institutions that, the states play games, right? See that in that way. That's a very international society approach. Diplomacy, war, all of these fundamental practices, great power management, law, and so on. We saw a closure, and that was amid the height of the Cold War, with the Soviets and the Americans, as I was saying before, talking to each other and agreeing that, okay, it's used to, to treat space for military applications, reconnaissance, communications, early warning systems, but not treating space as a war-fighting domain because of space debris, because it complicates things with nuclear deterrence, and so on. So the closure had two aspects. Treating space as a collective good, not messing up with space, not treating space as a new domain of warfare. And that was also reflected in the Outer Space Treaty. But also you had, as I said, dialogue between the great space powers. Despite ideological competition, despite proxy warfare, we don't have that now. And you had this sort of closure that served us very well for many years, and now you're talking about going there to exploit the moon, to exploit this region, cislunar space, without a framework. Great powers don't talk about each other. We don't have a legal framework, we don't have diplomatic framework. That keeps me awake at night. I would call it that we're opening Pandora's open box, actually, cosmic box. Okay? Also, I'm not very happy with one person, the richest, by the way, in the world, owning more than half satellites in the world. I don't know if you are happy with that. Obviously, that was a wake-up call about Europe. That's another thing. I won't criticize too much the European Union today because Vera is here. But also the problem with Europe is the lack of strategy, the politics that Vera hinted. You have the French, Vera cannot talk about these issues. You have the French and the Germans keep on fighting about budget, about, oh, it's going to be my company, and all of that. That's the old European mentality, I would say. It doesn't work these days. Europe is already lagging behind. Although, as Vera, and I totally agree, Europe has been doing amazing things in space. And space is not only about military, about prestige. Also took a look about the role of European regions. I know that Azores in Portugal are very much active in using space data through Copernicus. So you already have a lot of space, and Portugal being part of that. The question is whether Europe can strategize in space, and I don't think you can do that with the old mentality.
Sure.
China and buffer zones, I don't think that the Chinas are doing anything different from other great space powers. Nothing different. When there is a level of strategy, is in the Indo-Pacific and especially in Taiwan, where they have this network of dual-use remote data satellites. And you can tell, in space, you cannot hide things very easily. So you do know that there's launching the satellites with specific inclination that looks at Taiwan, and this will create trouble for the US Navy and its allies. This is where you can see a sort of a strategy. But generally speaking, the Chinese are doing nothing differently, as far as I know, from what the Americans are doing.
Okay, that is one.
And the Soviets.
Thanks for keeping the time. So I want to thank the speakers, Bruno, who had to leave earlier, also Dimitri, Vera, for their wonderful presentations, the knowledge that they have shared with us today. Also CECRI for organizing this important meetings, and to the students that have been here attending. And
can I just add, sorry, Paulo, very briefly, I would like to encourage your students to get engaged with space. We need more students from Portugal, from other small countries to get involved in space, and not underestimate the importance that your perspective, by simply being Portuguese, you can bring to the table. So I just want to add to that.
If you could just share with us your emails, that would be very interesting for the near future. Can you?
Happy to.
Okay, thanks a lot. I will ask CECRI for sharing this. And of course, this deserves more reflection in the future. The space is where the future of humanity, as someone has already said, lies. So, and also laser wars in the future. All these topics deserve our attention. Okay, so thanks a lot again, and I hope to see you somewhere in the future debating these or other topics connected to space. Okay, it was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
See you.
Dimitris, enjoy your stay in Brussels. Enjoy
I'm coming, I think.